Hey everyone, and welcome back. Tonight, we're dimming the lights and traveling way back in time. We're going to explore why, for all its revolutionary importance, it really sucked to be a Neolithic farmer. Imagine a world before cities, before metal, before the first king ever wore a crown. Picture a time when the earth felt endless wild, untamed, and deeply unpredictable. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived as hunter-gatherers. They were nomads, following the herds, foraging along riverbanks, and sleeping beneath a canopy of brilliant stars. Their lives had a rhythm, demanding but also free. But then, something began to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, people started to settle down. They planted seeds in the earth. They built permanent homes. They tamed animals. This incredible shift, the Neolithic Revolution, wasn't a single event, but a long, uneven transformation that unfolded across the globe. While it laid the groundwork for civilization as we know it, this new way of life came with a heavy price. The promise of a full belly was shadowed by the crushing weight of endless labor. The security of a permanent home was haunted by new diseases and a fragile dependence on the whims of nature. In many ways, becoming a farmer was both the dawn of modernity and the beginning of a quiet, exhausting, and often miserable struggle. So tonight, let's journey back more than 10,000 years. We'll walk through the daily life of the world's first farmers, uncover the secrets buried in the ancient soil, and see how this new world gave rise to the first leaders and hierarchies that would shape human destiny forever. Settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind drift back in time, to the very dawn of agriculture. Morning in a Neolithic village comes slowly. There's no alarm clock, just the creak of a thatched roof, the soft sounds of your family stirring beside you, and the first pale light filtering through a smoke hole in the ceiling. Your home is a single room, built from packed mud and timber, its walls stained dark from years of smoke from the central fire pit. The air is thick with the smell of ash, damp earth, and drying grain. There are no windows, no privacy, just the constant hum of life in this small, enclosed space. You share it with your family and often with your animals huddled in a corner for warmth. A heavy stone quern sits by the door, its surface worn smooth from countless hours of grinding barley into coarse flour. You rise stiffly. Your back aches, a chronic pain etched into your bones from years of bending, lifting, and carrying. Stepping outside, the cool, damp soil squelches between your bare toes. The village is a small cluster of huts just like yours. The only sounds are the bleating of goats and the whisper of wind through the fields. There's no time to waste. It's time to work. The life of a Neolithic farmer was ruled by cycles, the endless, grinding turn of the seasons. Each day was a repetition of tasks that blurred into one another, each one vital, each one exhausting. Your first job is tending the crops. Barley, emmer wheat, maybe some lentils and peas. You spend hours bent low to the ground, pulling weeds by hand, the cool soil caking under your fingernails. As the sun climbs higher, the ground bakes hard. Your tools are primitive, a sharp piece of flint for a sickle, a hoe made from animal bone or wood. They break often. Every single movement requires immense effort. Looking across your small plot of land, it might seem peaceful, but that tranquility is a lie. Beneath the surface lies a constant, gnawing anxiety. If the rains don't come, your crops will wither. If a swarm of locusts descends, your entire food supply could be gone in an hour. If a blight takes hold of the plants, starvation is a very real possibility. Think about the difference here. As a hunter-gatherer, if one area ran out of food, you moved on. You followed the animals, you found a new berry patch. But as a farmer, you're tied to this specific piece of land. If your crop fails, there's nowhere to go. You can only wait, hope, and fear the long, hungry winter that lies ahead. Farming doesn't just anchor you to a place. It anchors you to time. There is no escaping the clock. The work is never, ever done. After tending the fields, the grain must be threshed and then ground into flour, a process that could take hours of back-breaking work every single day. The animals need to be milked, herded, and protected from predators. Tools need to be repaired. The mud walls of your hut need to be patched before the next big storm. The day moves with a slow, predictable rhythm. There's a certain comfort in that, I suppose, but it's also a cage. Your world shrinks, extending only as far as your fields, your storage pit, and the next sunrise. Imagine pausing your work at midday. The air is still and hot, buzzing with insects. There's no shade. The sun beats down relentlessly. You take a slow breath, feeling the sweat on your skin. This is your life. The same work day after day, year after year, until your body gives out. This new settled life also came with a horrifying new public health crisis. When you're a nomad, you leave your trash and waste behind. But in a village, it piles up. People lived in close quarters with each other, and with their livestock, creating a perfect breeding ground for germs and disease. Archaeologists see the brutal evidence written on Neolithic skeletons. They find worn-out joints from a lifetime of labor, spines twisted from carrying heavy loads, and teeth ground down to stumps by the grit and sand in their stone-ground bread. Infections were rampant. Malnutrition was common. Most people were shorter than their hunter-gatherer ancestors, and life expectancy was brutally short. Many children didn't survive infancy. And yet, despite the misery, they carried on. Each generation built upon the last. They stored food, they built walls, they slowly, painfully carved a small bubble of order out of the vast wilderness. Those fields brought a fragile kind of security. That harvest, no matter how small, brought a sense of accomplishment. And so, humanity persisted stubbornly, endlessly. As evening descends, the world softens, the air cools. The sounds of work fade away, replaced by the crackle of hearth fires. Inside your smoky hut, the fire casts a warm, amber glow on the walls. You eat a simple meal of porridge, maybe with a few wild herbs. There are no plates or forks, just a shared bowl, shared hands, and a shared weary silence. Stepping outside, you look up at the stars. They are the same stars that guided your ancestors across continents, the same constellations that would one day inspire myths and religions. But now they shine down on a world utterly transformed. For the first time in human history, the earth has been claimed, divided, and reshaped by human hands. And though your life is incredibly hard, there is a strange peace in this moment. The crops whisper in the gentle breeze. The goats are settled for the night. And you, exhausted but safe for now, lie down by the fire to rest before it all begins again at sunrise. That was the life of a Neolithic farmer. A life of quiet endurance, bound to the soil, and marked by the slow, steady rhythm of survival. It was a trade-off, the freedom of the wild for the brutal certainty of the harvest. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more deep dives into our shared past. See you next time. Let's journey back in time. Not too far, just a few hundred years after the first farmers began to shape the land. The world is already changing. Across the vast, sun-baked plains of Anatolia, in what is now central Turkey, something new is rising from the earth. It isn't a simple village of scattered huts. Nor is it quite a city, bustling with trade and kings. It's something in between dense, mysterious, and profoundly human. This place is called Kitalyuk. In the old Turkish tongue, the name means forked mound. To archaeologists, it's one of the earliest known places where thousands of people chose to live together, not just as families, but as a true community. They were crowded into a honeycomb maze of homes, rituals, and unspoken beliefs. Let your mind drift there for a moment. Feel the dry, warm air on your skin. Look out at the wide, empty horizon, a sea of golden grass and distant, hazy hills. And right in the middle of it all, rising like a colossal anthill of baked clay, stands Kitalyuk. At first glance, it looks impossible. It's a dense cluster of mud brick houses, packed so tightly together that there are no streets, no alleys, no courtyards. Every wall presses against another. You won't find a single door at ground level, so how did anyone get inside? You had to climb, up a wooden ladder onto the flat connected rooftops. These rooftops were the streets of Kitalyuk. This is where people walked, worked, and socialized, high above the city's labyrinth. To enter a home, you'd find an opening in the roof and descend another ladder into the dim, cool space below. Inside, the rooms are small and whitewashed. The air smells of earth, ash, and smoke. Low platforms line the walls, serving as benches, beds, and even altars. In one corner, a hearth glows softly, its smoke curling up and out through the same hole you entered. Imagine the rhythm of daily life here. The murmur of voices carrying through thin clay walls. The shuffle of footsteps on the rooftops above. The soft, scraping sound of stone tools grinding grain. It was a place humming with routine, yet deeply intimate, enclosed, and almost secretive. But Kitalyok was more than just a place to live. It was a place built on layers of memory and meaning. When someone died, they weren't carried away to a distant cemetery. Instead, the dead were brought back home. Their bodies were carefully placed beneath the floors where the living still walked, ate, and slept. A fresh layer of plaster would seal them in, perhaps under the hearth or a sleeping platform. Life simply continued right above them, as if death and daily routine shared the same breath. Archaeologists have unearthed houses built upon dozens of these burials. Generation after generation, layered one on top of the other. The very act of living, dying, and rebuilding, year after year, is what created the mound itself, the zhyuk, as old homes were buried and new ones were raised on top. It seems the people of Kitalyok believed their ancestors remained close, not as ghosts to be feared, but as guardians of the household. They would often paint magnificent murals on their walls, dynamic hunting scenes, mesmerizing geometric patterns, and strange figures that were part human, part animal. Sometimes they'd embed sculpted bull's horns, called bukrenia, directly into their walls, a silent, powerful symbol of strength and renewal. The interiors of these homes tell us something profound. For these people, the sacred and the everyday were not separate. Every meal, every conversation, every night's sleep took place surrounded by the memory of ancestors and potent symbols of life, death, and rebirth. If you could walk through the ruins of Kitalyok today, you'd be struck by how human it all feels. Not in its grand architecture, but in its intimacy. You can see fingerprints pressed into the ancient plaster. The floors are worn smooth from thousands of years of bare feet. Tiny beads made of bone and shell, once worn as ornaments, still glimmer in the dust. In one house, the walls were painted over and over again, layers of white, red, and ochre, perhaps marking the changing seasons or important rituals. In another, the stunning outline of a leopard appears, its body rendered with incredible care. And nearby, a handprint, small enough to be a child's, pressed into soft clay 9,000 years ago, is still visible today. There are no written records from Kitalyok, no grand inscriptions telling us about their kings or gods. But the walls themselves whisper stories. Stories of belief, of repetition, and of the strange comfort found in rebuilding what came before. To live here was to exist in a constant cycle life, death, renewal mirrored in the physical act of building and rebuilding your own home. It was a world where memory wasn't an abstract idea. It was something you could reach out and touch. So what was this place really? Archaeologists are still debating. Was it a city? A massive village of related farmers? A spiritual center, attracting pilgrims from far and wide? Its population was huge for its time, perhaps as many as 8,000 people. Yet there were no palaces, no fortifications, and no temples separate from the houses. Every home seems roughly equal in size and design, suggesting a society with a rare kind of balance, a community bound not by hierarchy, but by shared beliefs and cooperation. And yet, over the centuries, that balance began to shift. The mound grew higher, the walls grew thicker. New materials started to appear, obsidian tools, exotic shells brought from hundreds of miles away. Trade networks were expanding. It's likely that some families began to gather more wealth, store more grain, and control more resources than others. Slowly, subtly, the seeds of inequality began to stir beneath the surface of this egalitarian world. When Kitalyok was finally abandoned, it wasn't destroyed in a great fire or battle. It just faded away. The people left. Their homes crumbled, their ladders fell silent, and dust settled over everything. Perhaps the nearby river changed its course, or the land could no longer sustain so many. Perhaps new opportunities and new ways of life called to them from beyond the horizon. For thousands of years, the Great Mound slept beneath the Turkish soil. When archaeologists finally uncovered it in the 20th century, they found not a story of kings and conquests, but a record of ordinary lives lived with astonishing devotion. As you imagine this ancient settlement now, its houses half buried, its walls soft with age, you can almost sense the presence of the people who once moved through these spaces. Their quiet voices, their steady hands, their endless circular days. The people of Kitalyok remind us that civilization wasn't born in a sudden flash of brilliance. It grew from the soft, steady persistence of repetition, of waking, working, remembering, and rebuilding. And though their city of rooftops is gone, the rhythm they began still echoes in us today. Every home we build, every wall we raise, every ritual we repeat is a distant reflection of that first great mound of humanity rising from the Anatolian plain. In the quiet earth of ancient fields, countless tiny things still sleep. Seeds, grains, bits of pollen fragments of the first plants ever grown by human hands. They are small, almost unremarkable to the eye, and yet within them lies the story of how our world changed forever. It was through these humble beginnings, these seeds, that humanity bound itself to the soil, to the seasons, and to time itself. When archaeologists sift through ancient soil, they look not only for tools or bones, but for the faintest traces of plants. The remains of charred barley, the fragile imprint of wheat husks pressed into clay, a cluster of seeds caught in the corner of a hearth long extinguished. These remnants are fragile, yes, but they endure, carbonized by fire, sealed in dust, preserved by the passing centuries. To study them is to listen to the whisper of ancient agriculture. From them, we can tell what people ate, what they stored, what they feared losing, and how their choices shaped everything that followed. The science that studies these remnants is called archaeobotany, the quiet art of reading history through seeds. It's not a dramatic field, not one filled with treasure or grandeur. Its discoveries are measured in millimeters and patience. But a single grain of charred wheat, seen under a microscope, can tell us about 1,000 lives once lived. Imagine for a moment the archaeobotanist at work, kneeling beside a trench in the earth, brushing away soil with a fine brush, revealing a cluster of dark, delicate shapes. Each one a survivor of 10,000 years. Each one a message from the first farmers who dared to plant, to wait, and to hope. Before farming, people were expert gatherers of wild plants, grains, and pulses that grew freely in open meadows and along riverbanks. They knew where to find them, when to harvest, and how to dry and crush them into food. Over generations, they began to notice something subtle. Seeds dropped near their camps, sometimes sprouted again the following season. The plants grew where they had been left closer to home, easier to gather. Perhaps someone began to scatter them intentionally, pressing them gently into the soil near their shelters. A simple act may be born of convenience, or even curiosity. But that small gesture, the pressing of a seed into the ground, was the beginning of everything. The first gardens were not the neat rows or planned fields we imagine today. They were small patches of wild growth, encouraged rather than cultivated. People tended them lightly, guarding them from animals, watering them when possible, and watching as green life took root in the dust. Over time, these wild plants changed. Each generation of seed that was saved and sown again became a little softer, a little more predictable. And the people changed too. They learned to wait for the harvest, to plan for the seasons, to store food for the cold months ahead. The rhythm of life shifted from wandering to waiting, from following the earth to shaping it. Among the earliest cultivated plants were emmer wheat, einkorn, and barley-hardy grasses that grew well in the ancient lands of the Fertile Crescent. Their grains were small and stubborn, but they were rich in nourishment and could be stored for years. Each seed represented security, a promise that food would come again, that hunger could be managed. For the first time in human history, survival could be planned. But this new relationship between people and plants was not entirely equal. The fields demanded constant care. Once you planted a crop, you had to stay to water, to weed, to guard. A crop could not be left to chance. And so, the very seeds that gave life also bound their keepers in place. When the harvest finally came, it was a time of both gratitude and exhaustion. The ears of barley were cut with flint sickles, gathered into bundles, and threshed by hand with wooden flails. The grain was stored in clay bins, sealed against moisture and pests. Each kernel mattered. Each one was counted, saved and measured with care. Even now, when archaeologists uncover ancient storage pits, they often find the faint remains of grain. A layer of ash, a ghostly impression, a pattern left behind by thousands of seeds that once fed a family, or an entire village. In those traces lies the quiet hum of daily life, the deep satisfaction of having enough to last the winter. Yet farming brought abundance, but also fragility. When you depend on a single crop, you are at the mercy of the weather, of pests, and of time. One bad season could undo years of hard labor. The same sun that ripened the grain could burn it to dust. The same rain that nourished the fields could drown them. Imagine watching the sky in late summer with dark clouds gathering on the horizon. You stand at the edge of your field, the scent of dust and dry grass thick in the air. You can feel the weight of hope pressing against the weight of fear. If the storm comes too soon, the harvest will fail. If it comes too late, the earth will crack and harden. In that fragile space between fortune and loss, the farmer learns patience and a kind of surrender. The seeds are both a gift and a profound responsibility. Once you plant them, you have tied your fate to theirs. Each stalk that rises from the ground is a mirror of your own endurance. To ancient people, seeds held more than just nourishment. They held deep meaning, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. They saw in the seed's dormancy the mystery of existence itself. Something that appears dry, lifeless, and hidden in the soil can suddenly awaken with water and light. Burial customs from this era often included grain scattered with the dead, a powerful symbol of renewal. Clay vessels shaped like seed pods have been found in graves and shrines, reminders that the promise of growth continued beyond the grave. At sites like Kitaliak, traces of grain have been found beneath house floors, mixed with ash and bone perhaps as offerings to ancestors, or as prayers for the next harvest. These people understood the seasons as a fundamental rhythm, the same rhythm that governs the heartbeat, the rising of the sun and the pattern of sleep itself. To plant was to believe in tomorrow. To harvest was to remember yesterday. And to store was to have faith that life would continue. Today, when scientists hold these ancient seeds, they are cradling more than just remnants of food. They hold the very essence of time itself, a single moment, preserved by accident, protected by fire or dryness from the decay of millennia. Under the microscope, the structure of a 9,000-year-old barley seed is still perfectly visible. Its ridges, its grooves, the delicate geometry that once allowed it to grow. Some are so well preserved that, with careful coaxing in a laboratory, they can still germinate sprouting again after thousands of years of silence. It is a quiet kind of miracle, a reminder that the story of humanity and the story of plants have always been deeply entwined. We sow, we reap, we sleep, and the cycle continues. Even now, when we walk through modern fields or open a loaf of bread, we are tasting the direct outcome of those first choices, the first seeds pressed into soft earth by hands that hoped and feared and dreamed just as we do. As night settles over those early villages, another rhythm begins, not of crops or labor, but of belief. From among the fields and homes, certain voices rise above the rest, those who speak to unseen powers, who read the patterns of the stars, who hold sway over the hearts of others. In our next episode, we'll step into that world of mystery and meaning, the dawn of leaders, of shamans, and of the first stirrings of organized power. As the fields grew and the harvests multiplied, something else began to grow with them. It was less visible, yet just as powerful, a subtle hierarchy, a new shape to human relationships. The very first signs of power, belief, and leadership started to emerge from the soil of the Neolithic world as surely as the crops themselves. In the earliest farming communities, there were no kings, no soldiers, no laws written in stone. But among the ordinary rhythms of life, planting, harvesting, cooking, resting, a quiet transformation was taking place. Some people began to hold more grain, more animals, more knowledge, or more influence. Others started looking to certain individuals for guidance, for healing, for hope. Out of this growing complexity, two figures slowly took form. The chief, who was the keeper of order, the organizer of labor, and the guardian of resources. And the shaman, the keeper of mystery, the one who spoke to spirits and the guardian of meaning. Both would shape humanity's path for thousands of years to come. Imagine a small settlement, a ring of houses around a cluster of storage pits. The harvest has been good this year, but not everyone's field yielded the same. One family has plenty, another not enough. Someone must decide how to share, how to measure, how to plan for the next season. In this moment, leadership begins not as dominance, but as pure necessity. Perhaps it starts with the eldest, the one who remembers the cycles of drought and rain. Or maybe it begins with the one whose storage jars are fullest, whose judgment seems the most fair. Over time, these decisions become habits. People start to gather when disputes arise. They listen when one voice speaks with more clarity than the others. That voice doesn't command armies, but it does command respect. Its authority isn't written down, but it's remembered, passed down through stories of good years and bad ones. The first chiefs didn't sit on thrones. They sat by the hearth, surrounded by their community, weighing needs and fears with quiet words. Their wealth wasn't measured in gold or tribute, but in trust of fragile thing, earned over many seasons and easily lost. And yet, with each passing generation, the idea of a hierarchy took root. Some had more, some decided more, some began to see themselves as different. The village that once shared everything equally began to grow in shadow and shape, a reflection of the fields themselves, where certain plants thrived while others withered. Alongside the chiefs stood another kind of figure one who led not through laws or grain, but through mystery. The shaman, or the spiritual mediator, was both feared and revered. In a world where the weather, illness, and even birth seemed governed by unseen forces, the shaman was the one who could interpret them, who could whisper to the invisible world and return with meaning. You can almost picture the scene, a dim house lit by a single flame. The smell of herbs and smoke fills the air. The rhythmic sound of a drum, steady and slow, like a heartbeat echoing through clay walls. A figure sits cross-legged on the floor, eyes half closed, tracing patterns in ash. Around them, others sit in silence, waiting, listening. To these early people, the shaman was both a healer and a historian. They were the one who remembered the old ways of the hunter, who spoke of the spirits that lingered in the fields, the rivers, the bones buried beneath the floor. They carried stories of creation, of harvest, of life and death. They were the keepers of meaning in a world that was still half wild, half known. It was the shamans who taught that a seed must die before it can live again, that the seasons are a circle, not a straight line. Their words wove comfort into the deep uncertainty of existence. Over time, the chief and the shaman became intertwined, two halves of early society, one rooted in the body, the other in the spirit. The chief ensured the physical survival of the people. The shaman ensured the survival of their purpose. Rituals grew up around them. The planting of the first seeds was marked with offerings. The harvest was celebrated with dance and smoke and sound. The dead were honored with food and fire and whispered prayers. In many Neolithic settlements, archaeologists have found signs of these gatherings. Circles of stones, burned layers of ash, figurines of clay shaped into human and animal forms. Some are female figures, round and serene perhaps, symbols of fertility or the earth. Others are horned, masked, or abstract expressions of something unseen, something sacred. None of them carry a written explanation, only the silent suggestion of a deeply held belief. To our modern eyes, these rituals might seem primitive, but to the people who lived them, they were essential. Through these ceremonies, the community remembered its place in the world, somewhere between the soil and the sky, between hunger and abundance, between birth and death. The rituals tied the people together, just as surely as their fields did. They turned mere survival into a life with meaning. But as these roles of chief and shaman deepened, so too did inequality. Those who held more grain began to wield more control. Those who claimed special knowledge of the spirits began to influence important decisions. And soon, what had begun as a system of shared survival became a system of hierarchy, one that mirrored the very crops the people cultivated. Some rose high, some grew wide, and some struggled in the shadows. Archaeologists can see this shift in the physical record. In earlier sites, homes are all roughly the same size. Later, they start to vary in size and in the richness of their contents. Graves that were once simple become more elaborate, adorned with beads, special tools, or painted shells. The story of human society begins to bend toward structure, toward difference, toward power. Yet it was a quiet revolution, not a sudden conquest. The Neolithic farmer didn't wake up one day to find themselves ruled. Instead, they built the very foundations of rule themselves, through habit, through gratitude, and through trust. It happened through the steady rhythm of deferring to those who decided, those who spoke for the unseen, and those who remembered what had worked before. Even today, the echoes of that ancient arrangement linger. The idea of the leader and the spiritual guide the ruler, and the sage appears in nearly every civilization that followed. From the pharaohs of Egypt and the priests of Sumer, to the chieftains of early Europe and the mystics of Asia, all of them carry fragments of those first archetypes. It's a pattern that began in the dim light of the Neolithic dawn, beside the first fires among the first seeds. Imagine, for a moment, standing at the edge of that early settlement as night falls. The chief watches the flickering glow of fires across the valley, counting how many still burn a measure of safety and strength. The shaman sits in silence, listening to the wind move through the grass, hearing in it the whispers of the ancestors buried just below. Between them, the people sleep, farmers, potters, herders, resting from the endless rhythm of the day. The world feels small, but full. It feels fragile, but certain. Balanced for now, in that soft, quiet space before history truly begins to accelerate. And as the embers fade, we leave the Neolithic world, a world both strange and familiar, filled with work, belief, and the earliest stirrings of the societies we know today. The dawn of civilization wasn't a thunderclap, but a whisper. A quiet gathering of seeds, stones, and stories. And from that whisper grew everything that would come after: kingdoms, gods, art, war, and peace. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the land long before cities, before writing, before history itself. A world of quiet fields, of flickering hearths, of people whose names we will never know. They worked the soil with their hands, watched the sky for signs, and trusted that life would return with the next season. Their days were hard, but they were also simple, woven tightly into the rhythms of nature. They didn't conquer the world. They simply learned to live within it, to wait, and to hope. Every handful of earth you see today carries traces of them. The dust of their fires, the ash of their fields, the ancient seeds that once sustained them. Their legacy lies not in monuments, but in continuity. In every loaf of bread, every plowed field, every home built upon the past. As the centuries passed, the world of the first farmers began to take on new shapes. Fields stretched wider, villages grew denser, and memories of the wandering life faded into quiet permanence. But with this permanence came something unexpected, a desire to build not just for the living, but for time itself. The Neolithic people, those same farmers who rose before dawn and bent over the soil, became the first great builders. They weren't building for kings, or for the gods that later civilizations would worship. They built for memory, and for each other. They built homes, halls, and monuments that would outlast their own names. And in doing so, they gave form to something deeply human. The wish to leave a trace. A sign that we were here, even when the wind and the earth have long moved on. In the misty regions of what we now call Northern Europe, long before the famous stone circles and burial mounds, the first great wooden structures began to rise. These were the longhouses, immense timber halls stretching sometimes 100 feet in length. Their walls were woven from wattle and daub, a mix of branches and clay, and their roofs were thatched with reeds or straw. The interiors were divided by rows of massive wooden posts that marked the spaces where families lived. Imagine stepping inside one on a cool, damp morning. The air is heavy with the smell of smoke and earth. A low fire burns at the center, its warmth slowly spreading through the hall. Along the sides, families begin to stir. Children are half asleep, while adults prepare for the long day's work. The sound of rain on the thatched roof is a steady, comforting rhythm. In these longhouses, everything that mattered happened. Cooking, weaving, grinding grain, storytelling, and sleeping. They were not just shelters. They were entire worlds, each one containing generations of lives and memories. And when one longhouse grew old, the people would build another right beside it, sometimes upon the very same footprint, layer after layer. Over centuries, these quiet rebuildings left behind subtle mounds in the earth, the soft, gentle remains of lives once deeply rooted to that spot. Farther west, in what would become Britain and Ireland, another tradition emerged. This one spoke not of shelter, but of memory. There, on windswept hills and lonely plains, people began to shape stone. They dug deep pits, carried heavy slabs across miles of rough terrain, and stood them upright in circles, rows, and chambers. Each placement was deliberate. Each alignment carried meaning, connecting them to the sun, the stars, and the turning of the seasons. To us, they are mysteries. To them, they were a way to speak with time. Sites like Newgrange in Ireland hold their secrets still. A long stone passage leads to a central chamber, which is famously lit only once each year by the rising sun of the winter solstice. For just a few precious minutes, a beam of light pierces the darkness, falling upon ancient carvings of spirals, circles, and flowing lines. These spirals, which appear all over Neolithic art, weren't just decoration. They may have represented the great cycles of life, death, and rebirth, the eternal return of the seasons and of all living things. When the builders carried these stones, each weighing tons, they did so not in haste or conquest, but in ceremony. The labor itself was part of the devotion. Generations worked on the same structures, knowing they might never see them finished, trusting that their children and their children's children would continue the work. Imagine the rhythm of their days. The scrape of stone against stone, the grunt of collective effort, the calls of birds over the moor. This was work done not just for survival, but for connection to their ancestors, to the world around them, and to the unstoppable passing of time. So, why did they build circles? Why these vast rings of stone and timber that still mark the landscape thousands of years later? Perhaps because the circle was the simplest, most perfect shape they knew. It has no beginning and no end, just like the year itself. It's like a seed that falls to the earth, dies, and gives birth to new life again. Around these circles, rituals unfolded slow, rhythmic, and communal. We can imagine there might have been chanting, or maybe just a profound silence, broken only by the sound of footsteps on soft earth. The stones stood as silent witnesses, watching season after season turn. Even now, if you stand among them, you can feel a strange peace, a quiet that feels both ancient and alive. The builders may be gone, but their purpose still lingers in the air, as if the land itself remembers the weight of their hands. But not all Neolithic monuments were vast and monumental. Some were intimate, personal, made of clay and fire. In southeastern Europe, at places like Lipensky Ver and Vinca, people built small shrines and sculpted incredible figures of clay and stone. The faces they carved are stylized, calm, and often androgynous, part human, part animal, part divine. They seem to watch, to guard, to remember. Archaeologists often find them buried in layers of ash or soil, sometimes deliberately broken, perhaps as part of rituals of renewal. Each one carries a quiet grace, the curve of a cheek or a hand rendered with surprising tenderness. These figures remind us that for all their physical labor, the early builders were also dreamers. Their world wasn't only practical, it was deeply symbolic. Every fire lit, every wall raised, every mound of earth formed, all of it was a gesture toward meaning. What makes the builders of the Neolithic so remarkable is not their tools, which were simple, but their cooperation. No single person could move a massive stone or raise a longhouse beam alone. Each monument was the work of a community, a shared effort that bound people together in a common purpose. When we look back at these ancient works, we often see only the cold, silent stones. But try to imagine, instead, the people, hundreds of them, working in rhythm, maybe singing or chanting as they hauled the immense weight forward. The sound of their voices rising and falling with the strain. The shared satisfaction when a stone finally stood upright, perfectly balanced against the sky. In those moments, they must have felt both incredibly small and immensely powerful, aware of their place in something larger, something eternal. Today, many of these monuments stand alone. Grass covers their mounds. Sheep graze where sacred fires once burned. The songs are gone. But the silence they left behind is its own kind of music, a quiet echo of devotion. They built not for beauty as we might define it, not for glory, but for remembrance. They built for the steady pulse of life returning again and again, season after season. Each stone was a heartbeat, each circle a breath. From these forgotten builders came the first architects of meaning, those who shaped time into form and memory into earth. As the Neolithic age stretched onward, their paths began to spread across continents and cultures, carried by people, by seeds, and by stories.